And we're going to go right to the phone right now and talk about a situation that's going on in the NCAA concerning fantasy sports. Let's check in with Alicia Jessop. She's a law professor at the University of Miami to talk this subject with us. Hello, Alicia. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. So
welcome back.
Yeah, Alicia.
You were great the last time.
Yeah, let's get right to it. Look, the NCAA doesn't want its athletes, its coaches, its administrators, anybody participating in any type of fantasy gambling. Alicia, how is the NCAA going to legislate this?
Yeah, so the NCAA actually has a pretty wide-reaching policy when it comes to what it defines as being gambling. And it essentially says that the wagering on the outcome of an event, whether the wagering is legal or illegal, amounts to gambling under the NCAA stance. And so how they're going to do this is just by that, defining their policy that way, putting it in the bylaws, letting players, coaches, administrators, etc. know about the rule. And if you want to play NCAA sports, this is what you're signing up for.
It seems to me like Congress and the United States government have determined that fantasy sports is a skill. So wouldn't that be someone's defense that the government has already ruled or decided to not take action, the FBI and other agencies? So if you are a student athlete or someone who represents them in some way, would that be your defense, or is that the way you prevent the NCAA from ruling?
Well, we have to remember that the NCAA is a private association, and because it's a private association, it's not a state actor, so it arguably can create its own rules. What's interesting about that standard, though, that the NCAA can create its own rules, is we're seeing that argument play out in a different court battle, the court battles of O'Bannon versus NCAA and Jenkins versus NCAA, as it relates to the NCAA's rule on amateurism and whether or not that amateurism rule violates antitrust law. So we're seeing some of that play out, but for the time being, I think that the NCAA's argument here is we are a private association. Because we are a private association, we get to create our own rules for participation and membership, and the rule that we've selected as it relates to daily fantasy sports in that regard is that our athletes cannot participate in them.
But Alicia, if let's say I'm a college soccer player and I'm sitting in my dorm room and I'm at my computer and I throw down $2 on FanDuel, how in the world is the NCAA going to know that?
Well, I guess that's the million-dollar question, because there's this survey that's been floating around that allegedly reports that 35% of college athletes wager on sports, which I'm assuming, causes the NCAA a lot of panic. So the likelihood that any college athlete gets caught utilizing FanDuel or DraftKings is probably unlikely. How do you get caught? You make money. And we've seen that play out in the world of the NCAA in recent years with the University of San Diego point shaving scandal. We saw a gambling issue arise at the University of Dayton. So you're probably not going to fly under the NCAA's purview unless you're rolling in some major dough like those guys we see on the commercials who are making millions of dollars.
Or Rick Neuheisel a few years ago.
Right.
Yeah, with his bracket.
Yeah.
So that's my idea. Rick Neuheisel played March Madness, got some heat for doing that. Would the NCAA really have the nerve to suspend the quarterback from Florida State or Alabama or UCLA for a week because he got busted for playing FanDuel?
Well, what's interesting is if you listen to Oliver Luck, it's going to be a lot more than a 1-week suspension. It's going to be a year of eligibility down the drain. And so I think that that's exactly how it's going to go. If the NCAA really wants to stand on anything in making this allegation, they have to find someone with a big name or at a big program to bring down first. It's not going to make very much impact if you're bringing down a University of San Diego basketball player or a Dayton football player. Where the real message is sent is if you find a student athlete participating in these activities that's at a bigger profile school or has a bigger name recognition value behind him.
You brought up the young men that are appearing on those commercials showing that they've won $75,000 or whatever. I kind of come back to it, but it's sort of like it's not even like the IRS that if what would it have to be? Somebody ratting somebody out and saying, "Oh, I watched him and he won $20,000 last week and he dumped me as his girlfriend and he's." But I'm getting to a point here that do FanDuel and DraftKings, and I don't know enough about it, do they have to actually reveal the names of anybody that's gambling with them?
Well, I mean, that's where things get interesting, right? Is the NCAA does not have jurisdiction over DraftKings or FanDuel. And so how this might come into play is, let's say that a lot of college athletes start using these sites and that the NCAA determines that their use of the sites is detrimental to its bylaws. The NCAA could attempt to sue DraftKings and FanDuel for some very obscure business reasons, which I'm not going to get into with your listeners, but they could attempt that lawsuit and try to attain the names of athletes using the services that way. But my guess is they're not going to go that route because it's very time-consuming, it's very expensive, there's probably bigger fish that they need to fry and issues that they need to address. But how I think a college athlete, gets caught using one of these sites is by opening their mouth. At your top D1 programs, you have at least a handful of people who are responsible for making sure that their college athletes are complying with the NCAA's bylaws. These are called compliance staff members. And so these people are on the lookout day in and day out for activity on social media, for what the players are pulling up to in terms of vehicles on campus, to begin identifying potential breaches of the bylaws. So I think it's more likely that that's where the violations would be identified from.
Good point.
Alicia, really appreciate your time. Again, where can people read your stuff?
I'm on the Huffington Post and CNBC, or you can find me on Twitter at Ruling Sports.
Sounds great. Alicia, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Alicia Jessop. She's a law professor at the University of Miami, and that portion of the big stuff brought to you by...
She's from Denver, isn't she?
Jimmy? Is she from Denver? Yeah?
Yeah.
Grand Prix Motorsports sponsored that segment. They're your source for the original motorcycle, Indian motorcycles. So check out the newest line of Indian cycles at Grand Prix Motorsports. They're located on County Line in Santa Fe. That's where Shannon right here found her Indian motorcycle.